this part of the event where we're just going to sort of have a conversation. And at some point, we'd obviously like to get you all involved in that. So, as you know, we've got some really amazing people in our midst today. We've got Steve, we've got Jean, and we have Egosa. So we're just going to have a discussion and ask a few questions, and you guys can at some point interact with us on that. So you're both very welcome to Nigeria. It's great to have you here, and thank you for your interest and helping us with getting things moving in the right direction. So Steve, you've been to 14 cities in the US in the last year alone. Tell us a little bit about that journey to those US cities, and then to other regions, of course, and globally. Hello. We have a technical hitch here.
Hello. Okay. Much better. First of all, it's great to be here. We've had a great trip over the last week or so in Africa. Started at Kenya with the Global Entrepreneurship Summit with President Obama and 1,000 entrepreneurs from all around the world, many from Africa. And then we were in Ghana, and now obviously we are in Nigeria. We figured we'd save the best for last, and so far it has been an awesome time to be here the last couple days. And we've learned a lot about what's happening, and we're still in the process of learning, so look forward to this discussion. Really look forward to the pitch competition, which is always the highlight. We've heard there's some great entrepreneurs pitching. In terms of the question, in the United States, I think everybody recognizes it as a very innovative entrepreneurial nation, and it is, but the reality is that's true in some parts of the country, but not as true in all parts of the country. That last year, 75% of the venture capital in the United States went to California, New York, and Massachusetts, which are 3 of our 50 states, and the other 47 states were fighting over the other 25%. So what we're trying to do within the United States is promote startup communities in places like Detroit and Des Moines and Chicago and Nashville and Kansas City and St. Louis and Minneapolis, and build them up as strong startup communities. The reason we do that is we think it's better for the nation if we have a more evenly dispersed innovation economy versus everything in a few places. And that's part of what motivated us to come to Africa and not just attend the summit with the president, but also visit other countries. We're trying to figure out what we can do to help catalyze a little bit more momentum and sense of possibility, more capital, more talent in places like Lagos, which we really do believe are rising as startup communities. So it's a lot what's happened here, particularly in the last 5 years, is really quite extraordinary. And I think obviously you're living it every day and see it firsthand. I think with the next 5 years, there's an opportunity to take some of these companies that are startups and turn them into speed-ups that aren't just small companies serving Nigeria, but big companies serving all of Africa and increasingly all over the world. So I think you'll start seeing more global competitors emerging from places like Lagos, and it's been great to see.
Fantastic. And Jean, whilst we continue to look at those startups, do you see a link between financial return and social challenges?
Yeah, most definitely. So hello, everyone. I'm Jean Case, and I'm CEO of the Case Foundation. And Steve and I are certainly delighted to be here. But we also have our senior team from the Case Foundation with us on this trip, looking at the same companies, meeting a lot of folks, too. I feel like I'm especially excited to be at CC Hub because we share some DNA. The Case Foundation is all about social innovation, and specifically to your question, Mo, we're very, very excited about this new generation of companies that are being built to address key social challenges, both in home communities and abroad. And so we were really looking forward to coming here, hearing some of the stories, seeing some of the companies. This area, which is called impact investing, where the social enterprises live, is something we've been excited about for a long time, and I spend a great deal of my time really focused on it and trying to grow a bigger ecosystem, both in the United States and around the world, that provides more awareness, more access to capital, more people coming into the mix, more entrepreneurs building great companies that can solve social challenges going forward. We are a foundation, and so we also do philanthropic grants, but we are at least equally, if not more, excited about the possibility of the entrepreneurial spirit to address core challenges. And lastly, I would just say Steve talked about going from Kenya to Ghana and now being here in Nigeria. The other thing we're super passionate about is inclusive entrepreneurship, and specifically bringing segments of the society who've been left on the sidelines when it comes to building great companies and bringing them in. And that includes women, and I think we've been really awestruck at the participation of women, and I know Mo is with us in Kenya. We had a panel on this, the participation of women in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here, and Nigeria has not disappointed, so delighted to be here.
Egosa, you're not left out there. You know, how can we level the playing field for non-expat entrepreneurs?
So again, thanks a lot for having me. My name is Agosa. I managing partner for Echo VC. We're a seed stage technology firm based in Lagos, focused on Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa. So a lot of this has to do with changing the perspective of investors. So a lot of investors, and I think I certainly was guilty of that when I lived in Silicon Valley, is that eventually you just start to see the same types of entrepreneurs because you're correlating them with those who've been successful. And so they all wear khakis, blue shirts, they all went to Stanford and MIT, right, and they write code in their sleep. But then you founded AOL, so it's but the truth is that being here as we have, sort of investing before investing over the last 3 years, we are finding a lot of the entrepreneurs who are underserved. And a bunch of them have not gone overseas to school or anything of the sort. But what we find is that there is a composite DNA around what we think to be the successful entrepreneur. And the first and biggest signal is sort of they have very high conviction about the problems they're solving and open to the variety of solutions to that. So we're looking for those types of entrepreneurs. We don't care whether or not they speak with an American accent or a UK accent, but we can tell when you're looking at an entrepreneur that is going to win with or without you. And those are the ones that we want to support. And they're both genders, and they're really out here looking for support. So I think for us, we're a small investor, and so part of it is building a collaborative network of investors and mentors that can grow these entrepreneurs.
Great, fantastic. Steve, where do you see that link between the big companies and the startups? How effective is that in terms of sort of taking, that smaller organization to being a part of that bigger global organization?
No, I think it's tricky. I think there's a role for big companies, obviously, but I think the real innovation happens with small companies. It's hard when companies get large to be innovative. It just is. We saw this even.
So if you're large, there's no innovation?
Well, if you get large, it gets tougher. It doesn't mean you can't do it. There's some examples of companies that have innovated at scale. Apple, Amazon, Google are some, but actually most have a struggle. And AOL, we started 30 years ago this summer. Only 3% of people were online. We started with a couple dozen people, then it got to a couple hundred people, then a couple thousand people, and then tens of thousands of people. We went from a few thousand subscribers to tens of millions of subscribers. And as it got bigger, it got harder. There's no question about it. You kind of shift from being the attacker to being the defender. You go from being the disruptor to being the protector. It's like in sports, you kind of end up playing what's sometimes called the protect defense. You're trying to, of course you want to grow, but you also want to protect what's there. And as a result, you're less likely to really be thinking around, looking around the corners and focusing on innovation at the periphery, which is why entrepreneurship is alive all across the world. It's really starting to revolutionize healthcare and education and energy and transportation and food and Internet of Things, all kinds of different things. Most of that innovation is happening in small companies. Most of it's happening in places like this. And so the question is, how do you help nurture that? How do you help support that? How do you create vehicles like this where people can gather and learn and work together, create the right investment vehicles to provide that initial capital? We've had lunch with a number of people doing things in the education space, Andela and others. How do you make sure you've got the talent, the skills development to make that possible? But we're betting, we believe entrepreneurs can change the world. We believe startups really are the biggest force for innovation. We believe that startups ultimately, we've seen this in the United States, that part of the reason President Obama created something called Startup America about 4 or 5 years ago and asked me to chair it, is the research we did, McKinsey and others did it, basically looked back over the last 30 years in the United States, and they concluded all the job creation, all the net job creation was coming from the young startups. So the small businesses were important, restaurants and other things, but usually what happened there is one restaurant closes, another one opens. It doesn't actually create a lot of net new jobs. The big companies, some are growing, some are declining. As a category, the big companies don't create a lot of net jobs. So if you want to create jobs, you want to create that economic growth, you want to give people a sense of hope and possibility, the place to focus is on startups. So that's not to say that big companies don't have a role. I think in the next wave of innovation, small companies partnering with big companies will be one of the skill sets. If you want to revolutionize healthcare, partnering with a hospital might make sense. If you want to revolutionize learning, partnering with a university might make sense. So there's a natural connection between the small companies and the big companies, but we have to go kind of double down and bet on the entrepreneurs like Entrepreneurs in this room to do the innovative things that really do kind of create the path forward.
And this next question is for Jean and I. You know, as women, you know, we're out there, we're doing it, you know, but how do we encourage women out there to sort of be able to take that leap of faith in what they believe in? You know, what are some of the key lessons you've learned, and what could you share with our audiences today with regards to, if you are a woman and you're out there, you have this message you want to start, you have this passion, you've got this thing in your belly that's saying, I want to go out there and make this happen. How do we encourage them to be able to take that step? Because I engage with women all the time, and I just find that there's a big fear about doing it.
Yes, that's right. So I think, you know, women have really some beautiful qualities that we should all celebrate. But we have to make sure those same qualities don't hold them back. They're not the first always, and there are exceptions to every rule here, to say, pick me, or let me tell you why I'm great. So at the Case Foundation, we actually developed some curriculum to encourage not just women, but a broad spectrum of society around a program we call Be Fearless, and you can find it on our Case Foundation site. And the whole idea is really encouraging those who haven't jumped in. You know, in entrepreneurship, women should really be great, because at the end of the day, what do entrepreneurs do? They solve problems. And the closer they've been to living that problem and growing frustrated with that problem, the better they're probably going to be to find a solution to that problem. And the president himself said, how great can we be if half our team never gets on the field? And the fact of the matter is that's as true in the United States as it is here in Africa. In fact, as I said at the opening of my remarks, we've seen more participation by women in many of the entrepreneurial environments we've been in here in Africa than we typically see at home in the United States. So we're very encouraging to women, and I will say we just came from Andela, and for those of you that don't know Andela, they really take, you know, the top 1% that sort of qualify to become coders, and they put them through a number of years of a training program while they're employed to be working for companies in the United States. And they have programs specifically focused on women. And what they said was about, across the board in Andela, about 25% of the people who come into the program come because a friend said, you should go do this, it's great. And I just want to say to the women here, if you're in this room, you're awesome, you're with us today, you're making a difference in this ecosystem. Make sure you bring at least another woman along with you. I think women need extra bucking up. I think women need someone in their life who says, yes, you can when you think you can't. And I think encouraging one another. And to the men, we need you encouraging the women in your life as well. And I think, you know, it could be as simple as that, actually.
Fantastic. And also at Andela, they said that I think about 20% of the people in the program, it's a new program, just started about a year ago, are women, but the women are just as good, if not better, engineers than the men. So the question is, how do you recruit more into them and give more people that on-ramp, that opportunity?
Absolutely. Egosa, let's talk about technology. How do we ensure that technology can play a vital role in, you know, this new wave of entrepreneurial spirit that we're moving into in Nigeria and across the continent today?
Well, I think one of the ways you do this is by having cross-functional teams. Right, and you know, for a lot of the founding teams that we're seeing sort of in the entrepreneurial space right now, a lot of them are sort of more sort of highly technical. You do need a good mix, right? And because once you have someone who can bring sort of the mindset of using technology to make your dots connect faster and quicker, you can do a lot more things with greater impact, right? So for instance, you know, there are companies we've seen here that are, you know, going after different segments, like in agriculture. Agriculture is still, you know, for a number of reasons, still sort of old school in many parts of the country. And so you have to bring that mentality of being able to understand how it works today, but being able to teach how it will work better tomorrow with technology, right? So that you can do that with entrepreneurs who are passionate, who have domain expertise, but who are partnering with the right folks to bring sort of a good circular view on what the next generation means. And that's hard, and so you have to do this one at a time. I think we talked about this earlier. You know, these things don't happen overnight.
Right.
It takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And so it's going to be very important to invest that time.
Great. You know, Steve, what would you say are the critical skill set required of an entrepreneur today? What does it take? I mean, I think everybody wakes up in Nigeria. I meet a lot of young people that they all have great ideas. But there's a big difference between having an idea and that idea becoming a reality, and you necessarily having the right skills to ensure that it can become a reality.
Yeah, that's right. Thomas Edison, one of America's greatest inventors and entrepreneurs, said over 100 years ago, vision without execution is hallucination. Having an idea is great. You know, having a big idea is better. But if you don't have don't figure out a way to execute against that idea and turn it into a real business that really has significant impact and creates significant value, then what's the point? And so I think from our standpoint, we've learned that it's, you know, having a big idea that can have a significant impact is the starting point. And just when we hear pitches, it's like, is this something that really can impact lots of people, hopefully millions of people, maybe hundreds of millions of people all around the world? So does it have the ability to improve people's lives and have a significant impact and create value? So the idea is important. Obviously, the team is important. It's not just the entrepreneur. Obviously, the entrepreneur needs to have that, be a little crazy, and have that passion about the idea, and have the resilience and perseverance to stick it out. But it's also the team. Entrepreneurship is a team sport, and so trying to understand not just the founder, the CEO, the kind of the founding entrepreneur, but the team. And when there's founding teams, that usually bodes well for the success of the business. So the people aspect is very important. And the third is really the execution. Some sense that there's a plan, and ideally some initial evidence that whatever this idea is, this product or service, it actually is striking a chord with people. It really is connecting with people, and they have some strategy to enter the market, some strategy to expand, maybe with partners, maybe with viral marketing. Could be a variety of different things. Some way to actually take that product and have it break through and be noticed and get more attraction. So it's partly idea, partly people, partly execution. But the core traits of great entrepreneurs is things like passion. You really, it is hard. It is frustrating. And there are many days, I'm sure you've all had this, where you wake up and wonder if it's going to work. That was true for AOL. You know, it took us 10 years before we finally broke through, and there are many days where we kind of hit a wall, something didn't work the way we expected, we had to lay off some of our people, we kind of had to, kind of fall back and kind of rally to take the next step. There are many times friends and family of my parents would call and say, doesn't seem to be working.
Get another job.
Get a job, get a real job. I'm sure you've heard that as well, but you have to have that belief in the idea and the passion about the idea and the vision for the future that you stick with it. And one thing I would say, particularly about Nigeria, that we heard about before we came here, and certainly we've seen, is there really is a resilience to entrepreneurs here, because they do have to deal with challenges that many other places don't have to deal with across the board, dealing with government issues, dealing with power kind of issues, dealing with traffic kinds of issues. There are all kinds of challenges that are unusual challenges, which make it harder. But the successful entrepreneurs just figure out some way to move forward and get past those. And the other is, we heard before we came here about the Nigerian hustle. There's sort of this and hustle, it kind of can be a good thing or a bad thing. It's sort of, but it's clearly it's a good thing that people really do have somehow I'm going to figure out an angle. Somehow I'm going to figure out a way to get forward. So you're starting with that Nigerian hustle, with a culture that has challenges, a society that has challenges, that really does require resilience. I think that gives you a big start. It seems like a liability. Maybe it actually is an asset, because the perspective, the energy, the passion you bring to your idea will exceed that most entrepreneurs in most parts of the world would have. So if you have the right idea, you have the right team, you have a plan to execute, the people in this room and the people in this country have an unusual advantage, which again, I know might seem like a disadvantage, that both the hustle and the resilience, I think, are really what's going to lead to the rise of Nigeria broadly and Lagos in particular as one of the great global startup regions in the world.
Thank you so much. Jean, what would you like to add to what Steve has said about that skill set? And maybe particularly you could add a little bit more on what you think women may need.
Sure, sure. Well, I have a blog series out right now on five characteristics of thriving social entrepreneurs. And Steve quoted Thomas Edison, but what a lot of people don't know, they think of him as this brilliant genius who invented everything. But the truth is, he said his greatest skill was as a sponge. And what he meant by that was, really his greatest skill was looking around at what others had done, taking that and perfecting that. And, whether it's women, men, whatever, as we move around, and I teach a lot in business schools, and what I hear from my students is, oh, I'm not creative, I'm not sure I can invent anything. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people have done a lot of things, and they haven't broken through. If you can learn from them, in the case of Thomas Edison and the light bulb, there were patents for that as early as 80 years before he got the final patent. Dozens and dozens of people had tried. So what did he do well? He went to school on that so that he could benefit from all the failures that went in front of them. And I guess the other piece I would add here is, look, we're here. We're at the home of social innovation here at CC Hub, right? If you're going to innovate, it means you have to take risk. And if you're going to take risks, it means that failure could be an option. We say fail fast, fail forward. Don't be daunted by failure. Learn from it. Let failure teach and keep going ahead. And that can be your own failure or the failure of others, such as Thomas Edison taught us with his sort of sponge quote. So I would say that's true more broadly. It's definitely true of women, too, who sometimes have a little less risk tolerance. We were made to raise the children and always be in protection mode. We have to lose that in this innovation world. We have to be willing to take those shackles off that hold us back because we don't want to take risks. But even here in Nigeria, Steve mentioned parents. We've heard time and time again that the parents are saying, what are you doing? Are you crazy? We both, in our tech careers, heard that from our parents. They weren't sure what we were doing. So just dig deep and find it in you to keep going when you're hearing the doubts or you're fearing failure and come out on the other side.
And whereas in your situation, like when you left Intel, your family's like, what? What are you doing? What did you do? You left a real job, paying a lot of money to do this?
Yeah.
Is that even a real thing?
They're like, why don't you have a job that has a pension? What's wrong with you? But I think it's a fantastic point. I think the one thing I would add as well is that not everybody is going to be a founder. Right? And that's important because right now everybody sort of wants to be, wants to create something, and I get that. But sometimes your path to being a great founder is to work for one first. Right? And so learn to pay your dues. You might not actually be optimized to start a company today, but you can go and spawn off those who are really good at it. Right? And so I keep telling people because sometimes we've seen founders where we look at them and go, you're going to be great the second time. I can't fund you now.
Well, that also ties to what I said earlier about entrepreneur being a team sport. That almost every sport, certainly like American football, for example, the quarterback gets most of the attention, but the quarterback is nothing without the rest of the team. If you don't have a strong offensive line, you can be the best quarterback in the world. You're going to get crushed every time. You're going to get sacked every single time. So the quarterback needs the time to figure out what moves to make. So the offense, particularly the line there, he needs to have people who can run the ball, and he needs to have people that can run fast and catch the ball. So sometimes it's a ground game, sometimes it's a ball in the air game. Same thing with entrepreneurship. Sometimes you're eking out small wins, this customer, that customer. Sometimes you're going for putting the ball in the air, maybe a partnership to get big wins. And also in sports like that, you also need a defense. Even if you score points, if the other guys score more points, you lose the game. And so you have to not just be scoring your own points, but keeping the other guys from scoring their points, which in the entrepreneurship world is your competitors. So how do you make sure you're growing as fast as you can, and you're also trying to kind of make it harder, not easier for your competitors, and there are people on your team in the operations function or the finance function also trying to protect the downside. Don't spend all your money too quickly and things like that. So you cannot be successful as an entrepreneur unless you have a team around you with a variety of different skill sets, which is why diversity is so important in those teams. The different perspectives, people looking at problems different ways, people having different skills. I'm good at some things, I'm not good at other things. That's true with all of us. So how do you, everybody play to their strength and have an overall team that has the right skill set that is playing well as a team?
Great. I hope we're all sort of absorbing this and taking notes if we have to. Now, at the GES summit, President Obama said something that was very encouraging, I think, to all of us there. He said, Africa is on the move. He said, Africa is on the move. So let's, please, all of us, let's write that down somewhere so we don't forget. But how do we take that Africa is on the move and share that message with the rest of the world, who sometimes don't think Africa is on the move yet? Because that message must be shared.
Well, I'll start, but everybody should comment on this one because it's a big issue. I think Africa clearly is on the move. I think that President Obama was acknowledging something that you all know, but not all the world knows. And I think, speaking again from the American perspective, the focus, unfortunately, for most of my lifetime has been Africa as a problem, Africa as a challenge. Oh, look at that problem. Oh, look at that problem. We need to raise money through that charity to solve that problem. The government needs to provide aid to solve that problem. I think in the last 5 or 10 years, we've begun to see, and it needs more visibility, but begun to see a shift in perceptions, not just in the United States, but around the world, and less about Africa as a problem and more about Africa as an opportunity. And while the aid is still needed and philanthropic support is needed, what's really needed is investment. And the investment started 5 years ago more on the private equity side, large corporate side, in infrastructure and a lot of things, and obviously a lot of infrastructure is needed. Only now are we seeing real momentum around the innovation side of things. And that's why the startups are so important. That's why President Obama was here hosting a global entrepreneurship summit in Africa, for the whole world paying attention to what's happening in Africa, because it's not just the demographic rise, and certainly Nigeria has got that momentum going for it more than any other country in the world, but this momentum around innovation, this momentum around startups, this momentum around entrepreneurship, that is the best hope for a bright future for Africa. It's everything you're doing with the companies you're creating and the jobs you're creating in the process and the economic growth that you're
doing. But you know, is your we saw of a grid system. We saw sanitation solutions that doesn't need the government to be in the middle of it. Really basic. We've seen tech entrepreneurs who are bringing hope and promise to excellent schools and education for people without necessarily the role of the government coming into the middle of it. And government needs to be a partner in a lot of these different interventions, but the point is, you guys are building solutions not just here for Nigeria, not just for the continent of Africa, but there are people all over the world who will wake up to these things. We know where the puck is going, and it's not the same old way of solving problems. You guys are leading us to a new future, and I think it will apply not just to Africa, but to the world more broadly.
Thank you so much, Jean. I'm encouraged and inspired this afternoon, and I'll close with Egosa in terms of what would you want to contribute? You're here, right here in Nigeria, seeing it happen. So how are we are on the move, right?
Oh, I don't disagree. And of course, because there's propulsion, that means there must be fuel. And I think the fuel is sort of entrepreneurial conviction. But I think it's a two-sided problem and opportunity. The first side is ensuring that we celebrate our local champions. And I mean legit champions, not the ones that talk about doing things, the ones that are actually doing things. And then the other side of the problem and the opportunity is that we don't have enough of the media platforms that are focused on this, right? So what you find is...
Hello, we're here.
Okay,
we're doing that great work. Ebony Live TV, everyone.
We got you, we got you. But I think that we're not seeing a lot of the media platforms. So if you're waiting for media platforms overseas to celebrate your own local champions, it's not going to happen.
Absolutely.
And what you find is, because everybody's sort of busy and everybody's sort of jostling for news, right, a lot of the overseas platforms are looking to the local media platforms for news sources.
Absolutely.
Right? So we could do a little better in building out the narrative platforms here, and do much better by celebrating actual local champions. And it doesn't have to be the flavor of the day or the flavor of the month, but actually do the diligence to go find these people.
Absolutely.
You know, as Charles Munger has said, have you done the work required to form an opinion? Right? Do the work, right? And then celebrate these champions. And I think eventually, you know, because then people can just say, oh, it's not just rhetoric, they're actually people doing really great things.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad, Egusa, that you touched on that, because that's exactly the work that we're doing at Ebony Live TV. It's really about showcasing that there is the other Africa. And our mantra says that everything you think you know about Africa is about to change forever, and it is changing. But I think we're out of time, because I've gotten the wave several times. So thank you all so much, Jean. Thank you so much, Steve. Egusa, thank you so much for coming and for sharing.
Great to be here. Oh,
Pardon?
Q&A.
The question, Q&A. Okay.
All right, your turn. Who's got questions? Hands up.
How are we doing the Q&A? Okay.
Who wants the first one?
So over to the Q&A.
Hi, my name is Mo, Ops Manager at Idea Incubator. My question is for Steve. So what was the first thing that you saw that hit you, that made you realize, you know what, Africa is a new place I have to go to. There's something going on. Do you remember the first few things or the first company? What did you see rather that really attracted you?
Well, I should say, and Jean covered some of this earlier, that we've been doing things in Africa for 15 years, mostly on the foundation side, mostly related to things like health, water, and malaria, and HIV, AIDS, and things like that. So we were aware of Africa, been to Africa 6 or 7 times, probably. The first time we were in Nigeria, but been in Africa many times. But we, most of the time, as Jean said, have been here more as philanthropists. This is the time we're really here more as entrepreneurs and investors and kind of evangelists of startups. And there wasn't, I would say, any one thing, but in the last 5 years, we've seen this rising momentum and just a sense of possibility. We have made some investments. We did invest in Andela, that's opened up here. We knew the founder invested in that about a year ago. We did invest in another company in Nairobi called Brick. We did invest in Sanergy, the sanitation company Jean mentioned. We have invested a number of funds, including the Village Capital Fund. And where is Ross? Ross right there runs the Village Capital Fund. We also invest in the Africa Angel Network. Poulay runs that. So anybody need money, you talk to those two guys. We invested in funds. We also invested in the Endeavor Catalyst Fund, another one called Black Ivy. So we just felt like now was the time to invest. But beyond that, the real reason we're here is try to celebrate what you've already accomplished and try to learn more so we can tell your story with the hope that we'll attract more people to come here to tell the story and to invest. And how do you attract more capital here? How do you create more funds like Africa Angels Network and Village Capital, other things like that, that really can, and what you're doing with Echo, really drive more of these funds that each can invest in dozens of entrepreneurs and collectively can really create hundreds of great companies in places like Nigeria. So we just seen it as a rising tide, and finally, because the president was coming and he asked us to join for this Global Entrepreneurship Summit, that anchored it. But rather than just go to Kenya, fly in for a couple days and leave, we turned it into more like a 10-day adventure, trying to really kind of roll up our sleeves and learn. And as Jean said, we've been very impressed. So we'll be making more investments, and we'll be, as Arnold Schwarzenegger once said, "I'll be back."
Hi, Jean. we just want to get your own perspective on what made you want to come to Africa. It would be nice to get your own perspective as well.
So, as Steve said, I think we first came to Africa about 15 years ago and fell in love. And we fell in love in a place that most people don't suspect you would fall in love. It was Ethiopia. That was the first place we came to when we came to Africa. And what's happened in the 15 years that we've been developing partnerships and friendships is they've grown, as stronger ties. And even as we prepared for this trip, it was a beautiful thing to be able, and many are in this room, to be able to reach out to our African friends and colleagues and get their advice. Where should we go? Who should we see? What are the places that, we shouldn't miss? So I think the passion for Africa, I tried to convey it in my last remarks. We have this saying at home, hockey is such a popular sport, and it's played on ice with a puck. And the saying at home is, we know where the puck is going, or you've got to know where the puck is going. And I think we've had a growing sense, as Steve tried to just articulate, in recent years, things are changing, and they're changing dramatically here on the ground. And if you're living it, it might feel slow, but for us coming back after a few years, it's quite remarkable to see the change. And my view is, what Africans are doing, that's where the puck is going. And so this excitement that we have is very, very real. And secondarily, I'll harken back to the first thing I said, which is yes, most of our past visits have really been philanthropic in focus. I'm more excited today than ever before that the entrepreneurial spirit has come into the mix of addressing our social challenges. And because we both have an entrepreneurial spirit and came out of the private sector, we believe that's going to be the promise of Africa. And with the inclusion of women as part of the role who've often been left out, we think it's pretty unstoppable.
Hi, my name is Dr. Simpa Daniel. I'm pretty interested in the fact that you've done healthcare before and now. How do you see, or what do you see about the potentials for IT and in transforming healthcare in Africa? I remember having this conversation with Ego Saif about a year ago, and he felt it wasn't ripe for it. Has that changed? What's your perspective across the continent?
Sure. So for part of the challenge with healthcare, and I think we could sort of look at how it is in America, which is technically a much more advanced healthcare system, but they've been resistant to IT, and it's been a very slow process. But I think partially with healthcare, you have to look at sort of what you want to do with the wedge, right? So are you going to do it sort of pure IT within healthcare institutions? Are you going to look at it within sort of patient and doctor communications, patient and hospital communications? And right now, it's very fragmented. And so what you find is you're not finding enough scale, right, that you can sort of assemble. So it's more like house-to-house fighting. Right, and in the U.S. it's a little bit different. You get a little bit more consolidation. You also have different stacks. You have health, you had HMOs and a bunch of things, organizations that have put groups of hospitals together. And so while we recognize, for us, we've seen interesting opportunities. I'll give an example of some that we've liked. So information, right? So the ability to know which blood bank has blood. The ability to use technology like text and whatever to get that piece of information. That's interesting. The ability to know which hospital to go for what specialty, right? That's interesting as well, right? But these are all, small little startups that are sort of attacking different tiers of it. And, we have to watch and see, because for us, we have to come in as investors and to make sure that the impact we have both on the company side and the consumer side is relatively large. Right, so we want to sort of be able to mentor these entrepreneurs, and we're doing that for a few of them right now as you're sort of poking and prodding to figure out how to get product market fit. But make no mistake, healthcare is very important. The delivery of healthcare is very important, and they are a little resistant to technology, but they eventually will embrace it because it makes things so much more different.
I'll just quickly add to that so we have time for hopefully another question. In the United States, the focus on healthcare innovation using technology really is on trying to provide better outcomes, smarter interventions, more conveniently at lower cost. The opportunity, though, in Africa and also in other places like India is significant. And again, this is a case where the challenge creates the opportunity, just as Africa largely skipped over kind of the telephone business and went to mobile. The fact that there are so many healthcare needs, particularly in rural villages, the entrepreneurs innovating there and figuring out how to create that access at low cost, are some of those interventions, some of those innovations are going to end up being surprising to people all around the world. So there are different kind of models depending on what systems you've got. And here, just like with education, or infrastructure, roads, things like that, the problems are significant. And I'm not underestimating the problems, but flipping it and looking at more as an opportunity, so the glass actually is half full, not half empty, I think will lead to tremendous entrepreneurial innovation in healthcare and education and many other sectors of our lives.
Hi, my name is Isioma Utomi. I do consulting work for SMEs. I want to know, I think Steve touched on this earlier, but what do you think the impact of the increased focus on big data and analytics would be on the African business ecosystem?
So that's an interesting point. Right now, what we're trying to do, what we see entrepreneurs trying to figure out, is to move entrepreneurs and SMEs from on-site storage and dependency and reliance to the cloud. Now, I think going back to Steve's point about opportunity and challenges, you're actually able to sell those solutions faster, because by the time that you talk to the SME, there has been a power surge or some brownout that has blown their computers, right, and fried their storage, right? So when you're telling an SME that, no, even if that happens, I can still bring your information down, that resonates, right? Of course, I think it's a little bit of magic, so you have to sort of show how it works. But I think you can see a lot of that. And so before you talk about big data, you have to talk about aggregating small data, right? And so you have to get these SMEs to be able to upload this into the cloud. And then you can now start doing interesting things about giving them insights, which is really what analytics will be all about how to change their businesses. Now, there's small, interesting startups we've also seen, in Nigeria, in Kenya as well, that are sort of really doing that sort of next level of analytics. Let me look at your data. Let me be able to capture that, because fundamentally, these SMEs need a lot of help with IT-driven decision support, right? So you move from this business, you make a business strategy based on how your stomach is feeling that day, to I can take the data, I can do the analysis, and I can sort of drive better decision making. But that's slow. And so while I think it's a big opportunity, I think the first thing we need to do, I think, as a community, is to figure out how to get these companies to put their data online and in the cloud. And then you can now start doing interesting things with that.
We saw that with some of the startups we met, like this morning, Printivo, yesterday, Ace, Africa, Courier Express, others, and they're just trying to, because they both started in the last year or so, basically just get to market, get some solution, and it starts with no data, then it moves up to some data, and then it moves up to big data. But you got to get the initial deployment going, and then over time aggregate more data and be smarter about how you use it.
We have a final question, Ross.
Okay, thank you very much.
Please stand up. Okay.
My name is Ona, a financial consultant. I'm very impressed by Case Foundation's work in Africa, in particular, the move from the concept of aids, handouts, now to entrepreneurship and helping startups and SMEs. The question I would like to ask is, what is Case Foundation going forward, planned for Nigeria in particular, as to promoting more entrepreneurship, startup? Because I'd like to see more hubs like this all over Lagos, various parts of the country. And some of us have a couple of ideas. I want to know, how does that fit into Case program, particularly for Nigeria over the next few years?
So it's the answer is we'll figure it out when we get back. We've been kind of absorbing all kinds of information, meeting literally hundreds of people, and right now we're a little confused. Not confused, a little overwhelmed, I should say. But we've been impressed, as Gene said, we've been impressed by what we've seen, and we will be looking for ways to figure out how to do some things, particularly around catalyzing more capital. That, I think to the extent as I mentioned, we've done some investment. If there's ways to make small investments in some small funds that then result in other investors coming in, we help kind of legitimize them, and then that there's probably something we could do there. But we need to think about it and figure out what the priorities should be when we come back. We also spent a lot of time talking about the talent development, skills development here, including the lunch we had with a lot of education leaders. So there may be something on that front, and we'll also talk when we get back to the folks in the U.S. government side and kind of get their thoughts, because they had a delegation with President Obama as well, and there may be things that beyond what's already been announced the United States can do in partnership with the Nigerian government. So that'd be the other aspect. But ultimately, we believe the epicenter of this will be what you're doing, supporting more entrepreneurs, figuring out ways to take more of those dreams and turn them into reality, and figure out a way to help start more companies and scale more companies so they have broader impact, and in the process are creating more jobs and hope and opportunity. We know it's a difficult challenge, and we understand a lot of the problems you're dealing with. We talked about some of them earlier, and we don't want to diminish them, but we do view it through that optimistic prism of how can this be an opportunity. And I hope you will as well, because I think when Gene and I were here, not here, but in South Africa 11 or 12 years ago, we had a meeting with Nelson Mandela in his home. And we talked about a bunch of things, but one thing he said that struck me, and I'll never forget it, is it always seems impossible until it happens. And I think as you think about your companies, you think about Lagos as an entrepreneurial region, think about the future of Nigeria or the future of Africa, what may seem daunting, and again, I know there are a lot of challenges and a lot of frustrations and a lot of issues, and we could spend an hour just talking about those, but it feels like there's a breakthrough that is imminent, and it feels like if everybody rallies together in terms of what you're doing individually with your startups, but how you work together and collaborate as a community and connect as a community, so it feels more like a close-knit network, less like everybody doing their own thing, and we can hopefully help attract more attention to tell the stories, attract more capital to fund those businesses, attract more partners to scale those businesses. I really think you might all be surprised by what this looks like. And even Nairobi, 5 years ago, the startup scene wasn't that developed. It was shocking and surprising and gratifying and encouraging to see what's happened in 5 years. My guess is we weren't here 5 years ago, but similarly, places like this, I guess, just started about 5 years ago. It was still pretty early days. It's grown nicely in the next 5 years, but I think the next 5 years are going to be the real breakout period. But it's not because of what we're doing; it's because of what you're all doing. So keep on keeping on.
At the end of the day, we see our role as a catalyst at the Case Foundation, and I pointed out earlier that our senior team is with us for a reason. We've already decided when we go back, we're going to go into offsite mode and try to download and really sort of digest and understand where we think we can possibly add value. But particularly, here at CC Hub, which again, just want to give a great shout out to CC Hub for the social innovation taking place here. In the impact investing space, we say we are unleashing private capital for public good. And there's, just like there have been sectors of society sitting on the sidelines in the talent pool, there's been way too much private sitting on the sidelines when it comes to bringing capital to addressing the key challenges. So we'll talk to everyone. We'll talk to our colleagues. We'll talk to our partners. I've been deeply engaged with USAID in areas like maternal child health. There is a lot of capital sitting on the sidelines that can come in and play a role if we can help them understand the great opportunities for investment here in Africa. And so I think that's one of the big things we're going to challenge ourselves with. And frankly, at the end of the year, when we assess the work we've done in any area where we're trying to sort of have an intervention or efficacy, we really judge ourselves by how successful we've been at bringing others in, the assets of others and the enthusiasm of others. Not what we've done, but have we done a good job of really significantly broadening the tent? And that's going to be sort of job number one as we leave Africa.
Final point is we've really enjoyed this. Appreciate your questions and the dialogue. But now the fun part kicks in. We're going to stop talking and let the entrepreneurs pitch. And there's 9 great companies. And stick around. You're gonna be impressed. I know we're going to be impressed.